take just a second. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Design Recharge. I'm your host, Diane Gibbs, and I am joined by my good friend Brooke Scherer. And she is a designer, but she's also a professor, and that's how I met her. In real life, we know each other. So I'm excited. She does a ton of stuff with sustainability and in design, and I'm excited to have her on. So Brooke, thanks so much for being here.
Well, of course. Thanks for having me and giving me the opportunity to talk about the wonderful world of sustainable design.
Of course, anytime, anytime. So give us a little bit about your background as a designer and then maybe as a professor, and then how you kind of got into being passionate about sustainable design.
Well, I never started as someone specifically in the sustainable field. It's actually relatively new. But what's interesting is as I got into this, I remember back, this is a kind of an interesting story. So I used to watch Oprah, right, once upon a time. And I remember seeing an episode, this was back in, I think, October 2005, and I saw this episode where Leonardo DiCaprio was on Oprah, and he's big into sustainability and eco-friendliness and everything, and he talked about a lot of things. They showed this total greenhouse, but the one thing that stuck with me was he was talking about CFL light bulbs. So those are the light bulbs that have the twirly Q on top of them, and he was talking about how, they use a quarter of the energy that regular light bulbs do, and they last 10 times longer. And so my husband and I, in our home, we started to switch out our light bulbs, and that was kind of where my interest was piqued. And so, of course, that was before grad school. So I don't know if you've seen An Inconvenient Truth. Have you seen the Al Gore movie or a documentary? It's actually fairly interesting. I just made my students watch it. I actually start off with that movie. And then Leo's documentary, which is, I call him Leo like we're best friends, but I'm just going to stick with that because it's shorter. But I also show them The 11th Hour. He has a documentary on the 11th hour. But I saw An Inconvenient Truth, and while it's not specifically about sustainable design, it talks a lot about how we are very quickly killing the earth. And I don't know, it was a passion of mine. I was showing that movie, the first day of class in my sustainable class this semester, and one of my students wrote big on his notes, "We're all gonna die," and it's one of those things that you watch this and you see how everything that we do all comes in and combines and leads to the destruction of the earth. And then when I was in grad school, I was a teaching assistant, and the chair of the department at that time, his name was Roger Bear, or is Roger Bear. He taught a course the first time that I had ever seen it or been around it in sustainable design. And I sat in on it one day. He was away, so I subbed for him, and I saw these students and what they were doing. And what was interesting to me is we all have these, conceptions that are misconceptions that if we just recycle, or if we, use recyclable paper, that we're being sustainable, but that's really not the case. And so as I sat there and I started learning about that, it became even more interesting to me. And then here I am at UT, and that's something, sustainability is a very strong initiative for them, and it's something that they were that they wanted me to teach. So basically it took all, it came from all of this interest of mine, and I saw it as an opportunity through the University of Tampa to be able to put forth, the information, start studying it, start researching it, and then now it's a required course here. I built it, and graphic design students are required to take it in order to graduate.
That's cool. So what about, and I think we might be having a tiny bit of technology issues, and I'd love it if somebody could just respond that you can hear and see us.
Oh boy.
I know, we might have to start over, Brooke.
Oh no. That's all right. People want to hear me. They want to hear me talk all the time.
It's good stuff. Well, nobody's responding, so I'm kind of worried that nobody can hear or see. Well, we're going to keep going for a little bit, and hopefully I'll text somebody and see. So when did you get to the University of Tampa? What year? Because I know you watched Oprah in like '05, I think you said.
Right.
So
Oprah was '05. Oh, good. It looks like people can hear and see us. So we
thank
don't
you,
have to
Meredith.
start over, and that's wonderful.
Thank you.
Because that was a really long-winded answer, and I don't know that I can reproduce that answer again. So really, I've been in sustainable design since 2005 is when I first became interested. But I started here in 2010. So I worked at redesigning the program, and the first sustainable course, was offered the spring of 2011. So and it's only offered every spring at this point because of the resources. So this is the fourth class that has been taught here at the University of Tampa in sustainable design.
All right. Well, cool. So, I mean, I know how it goes when I teach, and I'm on a different computer because my other one wasn't working. So, thankfully, I am not sharing images today. So this will be hopefully all right, and I'll hopefully get my new computer at some point. But, all right. So you and your husband with Leo,
Right, Leo, our best friend.
I mean, now everybody has to have those light bulbs now because there are no old light bulbs anymore, or they're not selling them. I guess if you stocked up, you can still use them. But so what are some of the common misconceptions about sustainable design? Can you kind of go into that a little bit?
I can. It's interesting, and I always kind of lead in to presentations or talks about sustainability with a sort of true or false, because some of these there's specific ones that I think are really important for people to understand, and they're huge misconceptions. So whenever I give a talk, I start by saying, true or false, planting a tree is equivalent to planting a tree is equivalent to just removing one. So if we chop one down, we can just simply plant a tree, and it's going to make up for the removal of the old. But the thing about that is that when we start to remove trees from old growth forests, there are ecosystems, and there's biodiversity in these old growth forests that can't simply be replaced by just planting a tree. There are animals that depend, and certain animals depend on certain forests in order to survive. We force people out of their homes if we're getting rid of these trees, but also these trees act as a carbon trap. So if we're cutting them down, if you say plant a sustainable forest for paper production, these are forests that are made from the same kinds of trees, and they don't capture as much of the carbon dioxide as old growth forests do. But also all of these old growth forests, we chop them down and we're releasing the carbon dioxide into the air. And so basically what carbon dioxide does is it blankets the earth, if you will, and then it traps heat inside. So the more CO2 that goes into the air, obviously the more we're harming our environment. Plus sustainable forestry. Now, there are a lot of people who are going to tell you that these are extremely beneficial, and they are. It's better to, sometimes take paper from a forest that has, trees specifically for it. But what happens is, sometimes, or the majority of the times, those are the only trees. One specific type of tree is used. And in order to keep that, chemical fertilizers and, chemical killers have to remove whatever else is growing. So all of that will seep into the ground. The soil becomes depleted. What's interesting and what they say in the 11th hour itself is the more we remove these trees, the soil, it's not as nutrient dense, and it never becomes nutrient dense again. Plus, we have to remember that all of the water, all of the rain that comes in is trapped by this soil, is trapped by these trees. So we remove them and we stand the chance for landslides. And there was a landslide in Washington, what's it been, a couple of years ago, that killed a bunch of people. So these are the things that we don't think about when it comes to, taking or removing these forests, and then we just can't assume that we can plant a tree and it's going to be the same. Also, soy inks are one of those areas that, while they are better for printing, they're actually not very eco-friendly in terms of deforestation. So deforestation in the Amazon, the number one reason for that deforestation is for soybean production. So while soybeans, may be a better alternative for inks, we're also getting rid of all of those trees in order to grow the soybeans. And then lastly, and there's more that goes into that, but for sake of not being too long-winded, I'll move on to the next, recycling and composting. So a lot of people, and I always use this example, my husband is one of those people that recycles down to a gum wrapper. He puts gum wrappers, I find them everywhere, like in piles, ready to go to the recycling. And I tell him, I'm like, you think that all of this that you're recycling is doing good for the environment. And while it's saving the removal of trees per se, or it's benefiting the environment instead of using natural resources, how was that gum wrapper made? How was that box made? Are there chemical inks in there? Is the paper coated? So when it goes to be recycled, are we emitting all of these chemicals and gases back into our environment? So, composting and recycling are great if we're using specific resources that are going to actually benefit the earth as opposed to destroy it.
Okay, so it seems kind of now I'm kind of like down. How can I make this? How can I do this in my practice as a designer? Granted, you're not saying don't plant a tree, but you're just saying, hey, be realistic about what that one tree does, and be realistic about, it's good to use soy inks, but maybe think about where they're coming from. If they're, getting them from the Amazon, maybe don't buy. It's kind of like coffee, I guess. People, the labor that goes in, you can buy good coffee. I don't know. I don't buy coffee.
As I sit here and drink my cup of coffee. Thank you.
But so, we've heard this: reduce, reuse, recycle. But how can we start designing like this? How can we put these practices into place and really make a difference?
It's interesting. I'm currently doing a project. I met a couple colleagues of mine, Eric Benson and Yvette Perillo, a couple years ago, or it's been about a year and a half or so ago, and they both teach sustainability as well. They actually have a site called renourish.com. It's re-nourish.com, and they have a lot of resources there, and I'll talk a little bit more about that a little later. But what's interesting is we've kind of come together, and it's put the dash in the Renourish. Yep, okay. That's right. We started doing, I know Eric was doing this project before we all started working together, but we all did this packaging project last time I taught this last spring. I'm doing it again actually this spring, and it's the design or redesign of overpackaged headphones. And so when we talk about reducing, what's interesting is students, even with the lectures that I give and the content that I give, they still have a hard time understanding how can I create or how can I reduce the material that I'm using to create this packaging. And I'm actually going to show a couple examples of what I had today. So they're bringing templates, and one of my students is creating what he calls little buds. So what he wants to do with this packaging is he wants to create a box that folds up. So in theory, this would all fold up and be a box. And then when it unfolds, a kid could, the packaging would be inside, and then the kid could unfold it, and then he could write all over it. But I posed the question to him. I said, well, what about all of the wasted material that you're going to see when we have to die cut all of this out, right? And so he's thinking in terms of, oh, I'm going to create something cool, but he's not thinking about, reducing the amount of packaging that's going to go into something. So his new template for that was to create an actual box. So all of this is just with tabs. So it's just a simple box. But the idea, once the kids would open it, would be to unfold and then maybe on the inside, the head would be, printed on the inside, and then maybe the body, and then the arms and the legs, so a kid could physically cut it out and glue it together and still have that interactive piece, as opposed to having to, cut something out of a square and then eliminate, or waste all of that paper. So thinking about reducing the types of materials that we're using, can we, fit something, or our product, can it fit better within the confines of a box? Or, do we have to use all of the plastic? I recently got a Fitbit, and I don't know if anybody out there has opened the packaging to a Fitbit, but it is unreal how much just waste is in there. Think about, if we're designing a postcard, can we reduce the size of the postcard or the brochure? Or what is it that we can do to eliminate not just, the extra amounts, but also the coatings and the inks that go into it? The reusability, can it have a second life? So for example, back to this, box idea, can this, instead of just being recycled or thrown away, does this box house some sort of reusability? So can a child go in and cut something out and keep this little man and play with this, decorate it, color it, do whatever he wants to, instead of throwing it away? Now this is just a minimal example of what can be done. I had a student the last time I did the project who did her packaging, and then it folded backwards and became an iPod stand. So instead of throwing it away, it could become an iPod stand. So think about how maybe we can reuse our products instead of just throwing it in the trash. And then also, again, recycling. So recycling does save a lot of trees and water and energy, but I think a lot of us have that misconception that we can just throw it in the recycling bin and then it's going to be good for the environment. But we have to remember that the recycling, once it's broken down, and it has to be reprocessed, where, methane's going into the air and chemicals are leaching into the water, or being disposed of. So the recycling process, while we know reduce, reuse, recycle, it is beneficial. It does save trees, it does save water, but we also have to take into effect, is it, more harmful than it is actually beneficial to recycle that product, or paper, or whatever it is that we're recycling.
So Dan had a question, said, Brooke, are you familiar with paper products made in Central America? Most papers are made cheaply from a byproduct of sugarcane.
Yep. So another thing that, another process in terms of being more environmentally friendly in terms of paper, is to use agriculture. There are various areas of agriculture that can be used to make paper. While I don't believe that not here in the United States, they're not widely used, but food waste such as wheat can be used. There's also hemp that can be used. Bamboo, if people know bamboo, it grows just like wildfire. And these can all be used to create paper products. But unfortunately, instead of being used, most of this goes to waste. In fact, I believe it is, I have it in my notes somewhere, I think 200 million tons of this material goes to waste in the US. Most of it is burned. So if we're wasting it and we're burning it, which is going to emit, gases into the air as well, why can't we just take the residue that's left over from the foods that are grown to be eaten, or the wild grasses, to make these papers instead?
All right, so let's go to the next question, which again, I still am feeling like, oh crap, how can I really do this? Because it feels like, well, I'm taking one step forward, but you really have to be thinking about all kinds of things. And so one thing simple that we could do is, with our clients, really talk to them about what we could do as a in packaging or in our designs, is maybe not choose coated. So if we want to go uncoated, it means that it's more natural. Now, a lot of times clients will say, well, I like the pop, I like it, the colors look better, or the images look better on a coated. But that could be where, you say use of soy inks, or use of, non-coated for chemical saving chemicals. I mean, that could be something. That could be one thing that you could do and make a difference, right?
Right, right, right. And it really does, it has to come down. I mean, obviously, as being designers and as educators, we are here to, visually communicate and create those packages. And we're not ever going to be able to get around using paper or using inks, or any of that process. But it's about how we go about that process that is going to help, shift things into gear toward a more sustainable future. Um, it's not just that, but it's also educating, clients, and it's educating the businesses that we work for. So, what's great about, being able to teach a class in sustainability, and I have this one student who is basically like, we're never going to change the world. It's not going to happen. And, I'm like, no, but we can't change the world right now, but it takes one individual spark. And what's, I met Milton Glaser about a year ago, and he was doing the It's Not Warming, It's Dying campaign, and he was handing out these buttons, and it's, for a combat global warming, it's an initiative. And I asked him, I said, as an educator, how can I change the world? Because, for me, that's important. How, this is an important subject for me. And he told me, he said, you can't change others because others have too much control. Care, that's the best thing you can do. Acknowledge and spread the care. So as designers, looking at this problem and saying, what are we going to do? How are we going to change this? It's about educating both our students, and it's educating our clients, encouraging them to maybe not go the coated route, or to find a sustainable printer that will use, more eco-friendly practices. Or I was talking about Eric and Yvette's website, Renourish. They have some amazing resources there for any designer to go in and look at. They have a paper finder tool that helps you to find eco-friendly papers. So we're a designer, we want to do this project, we want to make sure, that we're using something that's maybe, uses the agriculture, or has been certified bleach free, etc. They've got that ability for you to go in and search. They also have a greener printer tool on there that you can go in and search in your area to see if there are any, sustainable printers around. And what I really appreciate about the tools that they have is the project calculator. So if you go in there and you look, and Eric actually has a TED Talk on that specific tool site, where he talks about this tool, but what it does is it shows how you can kind of design backwards. You can say, this is my problem, this is what the overall carbon footprint would be if I was to design it in this size, and you can kind of work backwards and say, I want to minimize this, so it'll help you to minimize paper use. It'll give you some paper saving tips. So if you choose something, and it'll say, well, what if you did this and this? Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of resources out there for us. We're going to feel hopeless, but this is our job. So it's a matter of figuring out how we can do our job better. I just did a postcard design for a client, and it comes down to, can you reduce the amount of inks? Does it have to be so large? Does it have to be front and back? Well, obviously this was a postcard and it was front and back, but then you go through and you say, okay, I can fit this many per sheet, whenever I'm printing. So instead of doing one that can only, you can only fit one up on a sheet and you waste all of this paper, what is it that you can do to fit 4 up on a sheet, so you're minimizing that paper use? I also think it's really important to get students and designers in front of an actual offset printer. And I say this, and this has, nothing ill against the printer that I work with in town, but I take students on a printing tour every semester, and they stand there and they watch the material being wasted. It's cut, and it goes, like, I don't know if you've seen them, but these chutes, they just shoot the paper, the excess paper, onto the floor or into these big areas, and you just see them piling up, just piling up, and it's kind of discouraging. And what they say is, when you're in there, they say, don't worry, all of this is recycled. And then you look at it and you're like, knowing what I know about paper and the paper process, how it went from chopping down that tree and the resources, the coal that was used to transport that paper, and all of the water and the energy that's used to make the paper, and then all of the coal and the CO2 emissions that are used from transferring that paper to, or from the mill to the actual printer, and then they're just throwing all of this away, and from that paper, was it bleached, what is on that paper?
Right.
So putting that in front of students, really letting them see the type of waste that goes into it, and then putting other examples in front of them, such as the like this project where I talked about the Fitbit, or I talk about have you ever purchased those the whitening strips, the Crest whitening strips?
Oh, right.
Have you seen how it's like this massive box? It's not really this big, but it feels that big. But it comes, you've got these 30 little individual strips that take up this much space, but it comes in a box this big.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's shoved in. If you, purchase it, I'll be honest, I use Amazon Prime a lot, and it's very frustrating to me to receive boxes that are huge that have something this small come in it. So I'm very guilty of Amazon Prime and the shipping process, but it's putting all of those in front of designers that really say, how can we change what we're doing? We're going to have to do it, but how can we do it more effectively? Maybe that makes you feel a little better, possibly.
Right. So,
yeah, right.
So I think that Alma Hoffman has a point, and Alma Azarepe, I'm probably messing up your last name, Alma. Sometime you'll have to tell me exactly how to say it. But they both are saying a lot of it, or Alma A says that it's about educating the client, educating yourself, educating others around you about reusing and the second life and everything. And then Alma Hoffman says she used to work with a printer who would package extra paper for her in a box, and she could keep it for the next project or something. And a lot of printers, if you say, hey, recycling is really important to me, would you consider recycling your extra paper? A lot of them are already doing that, or you could talk them into doing that. And, they're usually pretty open, and they do a lot of paper consumption. So a lot of them are paper recyclers for sure.
And that's definitely great, because that means that we don't have to chop down more trees or more forest. But again, it is, what was the paper, how was the paper made? That's always going to be the question that's in the back of the mind, unless it is certified, made without the bleach, made with certain products or certain, agricultural products, etc. It's not a wasted effort. So I don't want anybody to think that I'm saying that it's a total wasted effort, but you also have to be cognizant of the way that it's made. And I saw Dan's question about anti-theft by design.
That's also a great question.
It is. And you know what?
Let's read it real quick, because people coming on the replay won't be able to see the chat. So sure. Dan says, which is awesome question, Dan, most packaging is anti-theft by design, which results in the oversized part. Has online shopping changed packaging or reduced the size?
I don't think that once you create a package, I don't believe that it changes in size or construction versus online to store. But he also, I love the question that he's bringing up about the anti-theft by design. Students went out, so before they start doing their repackaging design, they go out and they have to do their research. And obviously we all make them do research first, but what they found specifically this time around that the class beforehand didn't do, they found that a lot of the more expensive products specifically are located behind a locked glass door. And so they're looking at these and they're saying, okay, these are expensive, but still the packaging is created with so much excess material why? And so they're looking at it saying, well, why can't we just reduce the amount of packaging? You know, because you look at memory cards, and they have all of that plastic to help be an anti-theft. Which obviously you're not going to put a memory card behind a case, but
Mm-hmm.
if it's, you know, something that is an expensive headphone set, and it's $100, and they're going to lock it behind a case, why do you still need all of that material? And the problem is that we're designing in mind for, I mean, you know, we're taught it's about visual communication, it's about the emotion, it's about the connection. So how can we now reduce the amount of that material, eliminate the plastics? So students are creating these with no plastics. They can't use plastic, they can't use glues, they can't use tapes. The only thing that they can use are tabs. So for example, and this is one that a student had today, and you know, she's drawing a little smiley face on it. I think it's because she was pretty or someone was drawing some sort of a smiley face. I don't know why. This is what they do in my class when they're not paying attention, is they draw smiley faces. But I told her, I said, okay, so you have these small headphones, you know, and you're using material, and this is going to be tabbed at some point. Right now, for their prototypes, they should be using tabs, but some of them are not. Here's a tab. But I said, okay, so you're thinking along the right terms. So if anybody can't see, here it is. But what we have here is we have a little bitty headphone, you know, a set of headphones, but we have all this excess material up here. So how can we go about reducing that material while still creating an emotional spark with our audience? So if we use better material, and if we are more cognizant about how we are designing these, what can you do to eliminate or reduce, be more eco-friendly, and then still have them behind that case, but create that emotional spark? So there's that balance between, you know, the students are like, well, we're using chipboard and it's ugly. And I'm like, well, it doesn't have to be. But how are you going to create something while, you know, using templates that are still, so she still has to work on this, obviously. Oops, sorry, and it's still a little large. But for shipping purposes and for all intensive purposes, these could, you know, fit together like a puzzle for shipping, so it saves on space in shipping. But it also creates a really interesting shape that's going to help to connect the viewer. Jeff, another one of my students, is doing, and these are the actual sizes of the headphones themselves. It looks large, but it will fit in there. He fit it to a T. It is the shape of a honeycomb, or it's the half shape of a honeycomb. So his initial idea was to do, and these are expensive headphones, was to do the entire honeycomb to mimic, you know, that found in nature. But I said, okay, you're going to have too much space there. How can you create something that's going to, you know, fit for shipping purposes? So now we can create two of them or have two of them together for shipping, but also be sophisticated enough, emotional enough that people still want to buy that.
Right.
So, you know, anti-theft is definitely a big part of how it's packaged, but it also goes into the idea of, you know, where is it located in the store? You know, can we reduce that amount? You know, if it's locked behind a case. And a lot of people, you know, there are a lot of packages that aren't barriered with plastics and everything, you know, that still don't use eco-friendly materials that could just shift, you know, and think more about the long term.
So I don't know what tessellation is. Maybe I'm just stupid. Do you know what it is?
I
We'll have to
don't.
look it up. Okay.
Tessellation, I don't.
Dan is all getting it today. He's got obviously a big vocabulary. But one thing I think is cool, and I'm going to share, I think it's on your website, Brooke, right, where you can see some of your student work, and you can see some of the headphone pieces that were done last year. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to share that now, and is it in teaching, or can you kind of guide people through so they can get to it?
So if you go into the website itself and then you go into academics, there is a tab on sustainable design.
Okay.
So you can click in that, and I'm assuming the first place you're probably going to go is that first poster.
I'm not going there because I
Oh,
always worry something will happen and the thing will stop. So
okay.
you can walk them through it, but
Okay.
I'm not going to go anywhere.
So where specifically would you like me to start?
Um, well, I don't want you to go through it piece by piece because some people won't be able to or won't do that right now, but it's brookeshare.com. And anyway, and Brooke has an E, just so people know.
I do have an E. Thank you for
And
pointing
it's
that out.
SCHERER .com. So, well, one of the ones was like a Beats headphone, and those are much bigger.
Hmm.
And the guy had used, or girl,
It was,
the
yep.
student.
His name is Paul. Yep.
So Paul had used just had they were really thinking about how it was hanging as well, which I thought was a really
Right.
nice like the girl with the purple or pink little house triangle thing that you just showed. She has a circle for that, like to go on the
Oh, right, right,
stick
right.
thing,
Yeah. Here. Yep.
which I think is important. They have to think about that too. And, you know, I think it's really neat to bring this into the classroom for that next generation of designers and start not only, hey, you got to get people's attention, you got to do awesome design, but you also have to reduce and reuse or think about sustainability in that. So when I was coming up, we didn't really design that way, that we weren't taught to, I mean, that wasn't a focus. So really it's kind of just almost as important as making it look good.
Right. And it is. I mean, you have to be able to. This project takes, and for all of us who are doing any sort of project like this, we all spend our time. We all spend our time, doing the research. But I think a lot of the research goes into our demographic, goes into, type exploration, color exploration. But how often, and this is rhetorical, but how often do we think of the actual package and how it fits with the specific product inside? How many times do we think about the selling point versus simply reducing that kind of material? So Paul creates this headphone packaging, and he minimizes his material. He does have a larger headset, so he can't get around that. It's not like he can, create just this little itty bitty box to fit these headphones in. But instead of creating, I mean, if I remember correctly, the box was big, it folded out, it had all this padding inside of it. So why do we need the padding? So that's one question. Why do we need all that padding if we can conform that box or that packaging around the actual headphones? And then instead of adding that extra tab to it, he decided to use, the top of those headphones as the holder. Now, I do have a student now who has mentioned, and I think it is a very valid point, well, what if that scuffs it up or, scratches, and then are people going to still want to purchase it? And I do think that's it is a very valid question. But the idea that the students are physically thinking about how to use the project, or I mean the product itself, to be a part of that display helps to reduce the amount of materials that are used. So, it's a very vast and complex subject, really.
Right.
But the idea is to get people thinking about this, because, like, Mr. Glazier said, it's about making people aware and asking them to try and change. In my life, I would love to say that I'm going to change the world. I'm never going to change the world. It's an aspiration, of course, but like I tell my students, I'm going to give them the knowledge. And I hope that they take it out into the world and they talk to their clients and their bosses and they say, but what if we do this? And what if we do this? And another project that I have them do, and they'll be doing the second project, is information based. And they go in and they create information graphics that can be, sent to people, not necessarily printed, but can be, used as information on everything sustainable design, and then they put them into applications. Some students do applications, like last semester one did take this to a grocery store, scan the barcode, and see if this is a sustainable product, and if not, is there something else in the store that they can purchase that is more eco-friendly? So these, are obtainable. They are obtainable ideas, but the idea is to get them thinking about this and going out and talking to this client and this client and this person and this person, and then they spread that and they spread that, and hopefully someday, it will all change for the better. There's got to be, watch those documentaries and you'll find that something's got to happen. Something has to happen.
All right, so Eric has a question, and then I'm going to go to Rhonda had emailed one in, and I want to make sure we get to that one. So Eric's question was, and I think it's awesome, terrific question, what do we do to make our coworkers, our bosses, our supervisors care more about sustainability? Make them watch those movies?
Make cookies. Cookies are always good. No. Yeah, the movies are great. I will tell you that students, when I show it to them, and I don't know if it's because they aren't as enthusiastic about the subject as I am, or if it's just because they're students and they get bored easily. But there is I like to lead in with my first lecture with something that's called the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. And if anybody goes and researches this, it's pretty heart-wrenching. And so with the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, it's this large swirling mass of debris, mostly plastics, about twice the size of Texas, that just swirls in the middle of the Pacific. So basically in the middle between the west coast of the U.S. and then Japan. And what happens here is that because of what's called a gyre, and I'm not going to go into the details of a gyre, but basically just think of this current that's a rotating circle, and everything just kind of comes in and sits or rests in this area. What happens is this plastic comes and it is heated up by the sun. But because of the water temperatures, so it's broken down by the sun, but the water temperature keeps it cool enough so it stays basically in these particles. About 70% of those particles will seep to the ground. And then what happens from there is there are what are called phytoplankton. I'm getting a little scientific here. Forgive me, I'm not a scientist by any means, but phytoplankton are at the bottom of the ocean floor. And then they kind of mix, are mistaken by zooplankton and flotsam of the world. I don't know what that is either, Dan. Flotsam. He's throwing me off my track here. But so the zooplankton eat the particles and the small fish, and then we're eating, the large and small fish, which means that we're both eating the particles and we are getting those chemicals. So not just that, but any of the other debris. I need to turn this chat off because people are throwing me off. But also the debris gets caught up in the ocean life and the marine life. And when that happens, it's killing animal life. Invasive species also grab onto some of these particles and then float to other countries. And so what we have is just this big mess in the middle of the ocean. And it's because of the packaging that we use. We're not being, smart about what we're doing with this material. So, it all just kind of snowballs into this one big mess. So, there are a lot of resources that we can put in front of our coworkers, our colleagues, but until they see the effects, maybe see or do some research into the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, or watch these documentaries and see, how the climate is changing. If they're dedicated enough, it will get them thinking. So that's the best answer, long-winded answer that I can give.
So really start a conversation. And exactly. There are some other resources, Re-Nourish, Re-Nourish.
Right.
But then you also told me about this book, Green Graphic Design.
I love that book.
And there's also a section on putting it into practice. So it's filled with some good. I just got it last week, so I haven't gotten through very much. But it gives you some good ideas and if you could give this to your boss, but you could also just bring it to their attention of some little things that they could do. Because I think if it becomes too big, because it is really big, but if you make it huge, then you feel like you can't make a dent and you can't make a snap. But really, just like Milton Glaser said, you just need to, start somewhere and care. So I want to get to Rhonda's question. It says, which fields of industry should designers look to as partners and collaborators in this effort?
I've actually I've thought about this, and we as designers, we're kind of in a really important role where we are central to so many other fields. We work with marketing, we work with advertising, we work with big corporations, we work with smaller, clients. I don't know that there's an absolute answer for that, to be honest with you, because we have our hands in so many different areas, and I don't know why we can't exploit them all. We can't educate them all. Big businesses. The thing that Mr. Glaser talked about a lot.
He's not as close to you as Leo.
No, well, I'm going to be seeing him again in a few weeks, and if this ever happened to come across his desk, I feel, let's be honest, Leonardo's never going to know who I am. But I am, trying to build a small relationship with Mr. Milton Glaser, so I'm going to call him Mr. Milton, or Mr. Milton. I actually call him Uncle Milty in class, but for all intents and purposes, I'm going to call him Mr. Glaser here. But he had a lot to say about how, in politics, there's a lot of money, and there are a lot of businesses, and, thinking that we can just go into that and try and change anything is probably a waste of our time. But that doesn't mean that we can't start low and let it trickle up from there. Mm-hmm. So in terms of her questions, I think we need to be the innovators that explore all disciplines and all avenues, the business, the marketing, the advertising. We can work with the printers, we can work with other designers. So it's pretty all-encompassing, aside from those really big businesses that have a lot to say. And
there were a couple other things that me and you had talked before. One thing was with printers, instead of maybe using a square, using a circle, so you're using actually less ink, but it still looks the same to the naked eye. Yeah. And then there's also paper. People say it's recycled, but then you really have to kind of dig down and make sure. And then once you find people who are really doing real recycling or reducing or whatever it is, that you stick with them. And I know it costs more to use recycled paper most of the time.
It does, but what's interesting is, and I've read about this before, it does cost more in the beginning. But the thing about being more eco-friendly is that, or being more sustainable, is that, and I think what shies businesses away to begin with is that it costs more, but they don't understand the return, in the long run. So people put their trust in these type of businesses and these products that are trying to be, trying to take the earth into consideration. And also, the more we ask for certain products, the more it's going to increase demand. And the more demand that is increased, the lower the prices will get. But a lot of people are too afraid of spending that extra money at this specific point in time, and I don't think it's caught fire enough to convince people that this is the way to go. So we have a lot in our future. We have a lot of work to do, but I don't think it's hopeless.
All right, so we have time for, I think, one more question. We have 3 left, and we will have Brooke back on. She's going to come on with her students on April 22nd, so we'll kind of see the end product from some of what these students have seen. And I just think sometimes I just need an example, and so that's one reason I'm having her back on with her students, so you can kind of see the energy from that student level, as well as new designers that will be entering the workforce, and they have this other mentality that maybe we have to struggle to get to because we weren't taught that in school necessarily. So it's why are designers positioned at an ideal place in the world? We've kind of talked about that one, don't you think, Brooke?
I do.
Okay. All right. So we're going to go. All right. It can be a learning curve, like knowing, like, oh, well, it says recycled on the box. Can I just go with that? So are there any resources, anything other than Renourish or this book, as I hold something else up, Green Graphic Design, anything else that help us as we begin kind of implementing some of these changes in our practice?
I think it's good to start with more of a background of what the problem is and how maybe we can start to solve the problem. There's a book called Cradle to Cradle that I have my students read. It isn't specific to sustainable design, but it talks about upcycling versus downcycling. So upcycling, if we're creating something, how can we use it again or create it into something that can be beneficial to the earth versus recycling, which is going to be downcycled. Another thing about the downcycling process or the recycling is that we recycle it once and it starts to lose its strength. We recycle it again, and primarily paper, it loses the strength. So, we say, oh, we're going to recycle and it's going to not end up in a landfill, or we're keeping out of a landfill, but at some point it's not going to be strong enough to uphold anymore. So it's going to be in a landfill anyway. And these are things that are just basic knowledge that lay a foundation to be able to go into the actual design realm. And so Cradle to Cradle, I think, is a great book for that, or to lay the groundwork. I do have a couple other books that I require students to both use and read for research. One of them is called Designing Sustainable Packaging. The author of that is Boylston. He has actually a lot of good packaging templates and talks about how to use those and use tabs instead of the glues or the tapes to construct.
Spell his last name?
Yep, it's Boylston, Boylston.
Okay.
There's also, so you have Green Graphic Design. What I like about Green Graphic Design is that it breaks it down into terminology or speak that is easy to understand, easy to follow, and I find it an interesting read. Then another one that I find really informative is just called Sustainable. The author of that is Scherin, Sherin. And that is comparable to Green Graphic Design, but it has a great deal more examples, and so and it helps. I require my students read all of these. We go through them. They use it for their big research project, so that's a good jumping off point. But I do also really encourage people to visit and thumb around Renourish. It gives articles of information as well, not just the specific tools. I'm very fortunate to be able to work with Eric and Yvette. We're actually presenting at the Foundations in Art and Theory Education, so the FATE conference in March. We're presenting our packaging project and talking about integrating sustainability into the curriculum. So they're good people. Stop on over and check out their website and say hello.
Cool.
All right.
Well, I'm really excited that we have maybe a next step, and we have an idea of how to actually integrate this in, even in baby steps, in our own practices. And if you're a professor, integrate it into what you're doing. If you're a designer and you're doing a piece of packaging, then definitely makes you think twice. Yeah. And then also makes me think about some of my clients who are very environmentally friendly. I can actually say, hey, if they request gloss, I can now go back and say, I can do a little bit more research, but then go back and say, environmentally it may look better, but environmentally it's not better for the
right.
universe is what I was about to say.
The universe.
Or the university. It's not better for anybody if we use the coded. And so then that can be like a selling point for them as they hand out their stuff. There's another, hey, we're really, we have the world in our mind all the time because we didn't go with a gloss, and this
right.
is why. And so right. It's walk the walk kind of thing.
Yep, we'll get there, just one step at a time.
Of course. Well, Brooke, thank you so much.
Thank
And
you.
just to kind of, I'm going to share your link again. I think I have it in my, oop, no. Let me go get it. And then you had also given me a Facebook group. Did you want me to share that for the arts at UT?
Yeah, sure, if you want to. I mean, that's something, we keep, update student projects. So, a lot of stuff is on my website, but there are extra things that are posted there. So the students in the sustainable class last semester or last year gave a big presentation to the board of directors or the board of trustees at the university, and they did, they showed the packaging project from what the original packaging was for their headphone set. They broke it all down, and it's on the website, and then a comparison of the minimal material that they used, and they showed that at the board meeting, and people were really, oh, I didn't realize, and it's just those little things. It's just those little things that putting them in front of people are going to hopefully make people more aware and start to really think about.
I think I
Hopefully,
answered Dan's question. Did I spell it right? The
yes.
sustainable
Yep.
title? Okay. And
Yep.
the other one was Boylston. And that's
Boylston. Boylston. Yep.
okay. And then just so y'all know, next week we're kind of changing gears, definitely less environmental. Roz is at Roz Stenhall. She is an illustrator, a designer, a writer, and she's made books since she was about 3. So she's definitely used her share of paper, but I think she keeps them, so at least she's doing that. But she's avid about daily sketching, and she does these really cool sketchbooks in April, and I can't wait to share it with you. I can't wait for you guys to meet her. She has a ton of energy, and she loves dogs. So if you know me, I love dogs and cats. So I'm excited to have her on, and I hope you guys tune in. Same time next week, 2:30 Eastern, 11:30 a.m. Pacific, and we'll be talking about her fake journal. So I'm excited. So Brooke, thank you so much. You're
Thank you.
full of knowledge on this
Just
subject.
getting started. There's so much to learn, so just getting started.
Well, I'm excited to have you back on and have you with your students. Now, that will be a little bit earlier than our normal because, but we're going to make it work, and we're going to have her and her students on. So I'm excited to
It'll
see
be fun.
what they have, because I think you're changing people's mindset, and especially a young person who's coming just into design. They may not have cared about sustainability, and now they really do.
Right. That's the goal.
Well, awesome. Thank you, Brooke,
Thank
and I
you.
will see y'all next week.